with my Kilroy's Key 3 New to Me 2022. 2022 is almost over. I'd like to get this series done before it is over, and I only have a few videos left. Today is political games, or games that have either based on politics or elections, or have a very, very strong political component or theme to their gameplay. And right off the bat, I'd like to have an honorable mention. I said I wouldn't do honorable mentions, but, you know, I can't help myself. And the honorable mention in this case would be 1979 Revolution in Iran. This was a fun game, an interesting game, a game that kind of goes back to well before 1979 and kind of traces some of the revolutionary elements and the change in politics and the change in stance in Iran. So anyway, so that's my honorable mention. So now to the top 3 of my new to me in 2022 political games, or these are games either I acquired and played or just played for the first time in 2022. And this first one here, you know, really just snuck under the wire. I just got this actually this week, but I actually got it to the table too, and played it a couple times. I mean, this is a really interesting game and an interesting period of history. This is dealing with the American women's suffrage movement from 1848 to 1920. It is votes for women from Fort Circle Games, a game designed by Tori Brown. The next game that I'd like to talk about is Corrupt Bargain, the 1824 presidential election. This is a game from Decision Games, and this is a political game. This is dealing with the 1824 election. And the third game I'd like to talk about is Churchill, the Big Three Struggle for Peace. This is Mark Herman's design. Now, this game didn't come out in 2022, but I just got this in 2022 and actually played it a few times in 2022. So it made my top 3. This is actually the third printing. This Votes for Women, actually Churchill was, I believe I got that from GMT. Votes for Women was complimentary from Kevin Bertram, who is the founder of Fort Circle Games. And Corrupt Bargain I went out and purchased that on my own and it's a Decision Games title. So 3 very interesting games. They share some common aspects in their operation. What I like to do in these Kilroy's Key 3 is go over my point of view, which is presentation, operation, and value. So in the presentation, that includes, you know, box covers, art, counters, player aids, maps, graphics, card art, cards, anything like that is the overall presentation. Components, if they might use wood bits or cubes or even minis. The operation is getting into the gameplay, the rules, how clear and concise are they, or how easy is it to play the game, you know, the overall operation of the game. And then the value gets into how thematic is it. If it's trying to simulate a certain period or historical event, how well does it simulate it? How fun is it? How replayable is it? All those things kind of come into the value. So let's start with the presentation. Let's start with the maps and take a look at those first. Now, not all the games have maps, or player boards in this case, and all 3 of these have mounted boards or mounted player maps and boards. In the Votes for Women, you get a map of the United States. This is mounted. This is primarily a card game, playing card, you know, using cards, drawing cards, and using them for their special abilities and for, you know, placing cubes on the board. And in this case, you're trying to win over the support of certain states to get the passage of the 19th Amendment, which allowed for women to vote. And you have some card holders here for like cards that have effect for the rest of the game or for the rest of the turn or effect in final voting. So there's a turn track here. This track here is to keep track of support in Congress for the 19th Amendment. And then you've got regions out here where you're going to be putting out cubes for support along the way. Or there's two different colors of cubes based on who you're playing with. If there's different, it's a cooperative game. It can be played solo as well, but it's a cooperative game, and so you got different people moving on the board, which are represented by these fine people here to kind of campaign and kind of get support in different regions. But then you got the red figures are the ones that are opposing the 19th Amendment, and that can either be represented by someone playing them, or you can use them as the AI, and they will oppose you as kind of as either a solo play or in a cooperative play as the AI deck, and then they put cubes on the board in opposition to the game. There's also, when there's final voting, there's places to mark the states either as a green check that they're for it or a red X that they're against it. There's also dice in the game, and the dice are different. Even though you've got like 12-sided dice, they really only go up to 4. But you also have 6-sided dice and 8-sided dice. You got different kind of dice that are used in the game to roll for regions and roll for other things as the game goes on. So overall, a nice production value. The cards are fine. The cards are nice. They're not thin, but they're not super thick. They don't have a linen finish or anything, but they're perfectly fine. They basically have a title that's about that's tied to the history of what's going on with this event, tells you what to do on the board, but then also gives you history. Each of the cards have a little bit of history to them, and that's something that is common with the Corrupt Bargain. When we get to that, it's a card-based game, and it has history on it as well. I always like games that add a little bit of history to your gameplay that you can learn while you play. So there's a lot of different cards in here, and there's a card deck for the opposition. And if you want to play against opposition, or you can play against the bot, which is like, I think it's called the Oppo bot or whatever, and it's just a flipping through cards, and it changes the board state as you go. And it's relatively competitive, so it's not a pushover in that regard. So cards, cubes, and a board is what you get in Votes for Women. So that's the production value of this game. Next, we turn to Corrupt Bargain, which gives you another mat board, but this is only a portion of the United States. This is for the 1824 election, so these are the states that are at issue here. You've got a turn track. You've also got, these are holding boxes for cubes. You're going to be placing support on the deck, cubes and support on the board in this game as well. This has wooden bits as well, and they come in the different colors of the different factions that are running for political office, running for president. There's cards for the states for you to control it at the end of the game, but there's also this action system where you're using action points to take these cards, and then these cards do things on the board as well. They have events that you are dealing with or changing the board state, but then you also have history in the box down below. Similar to Votes for Women, you can learn history in dealing with this game as well. You also have these, I can't remember what they're called. They're like propositions, or the things that you're trying to link up. Some of the big issues of the day, like slavery, trade, and I think westward expansion maybe is the other one. So you've got these 3 issues that you're trying to match up as well, and that changes the board state as well. Really, there's a historical setup. Other than that, this is a relatively straightforward game. There's not asymmetrical powers. The four different candidates that are running, if you don't do the historical setup, they're all start up with basically the same footing, and it all comes down to what cards you pick and how you choose your actions and how you choose to, play stuff on the board. If you do the historical setting, then each one of the four candidates gets a little bit of a leaning to simulate what their state was when they started out their campaign or the process to become president in 1824. So this is the presentation portion or presentation what you get for 1824 corrupt bargain. So a little bit more cubes there and cards and a board. Next, we turn to the third one in this list, and that is Churchill. And this is part of Mark Herman's developing series. I think he's got one coming out for Versailles. Oh, he's got Versailles out, but there's one coming out. Versailles was for dealing with the end of World War I. This is dealing with World War II. And there's a third one. I can't remember what it's called now, but I think there's a third one that is coming out. There's actually another one in this series of his kind of political games. That was Pericles, which I have as well. That plays a lot different than this. And I'll put a link to the video where I unbox and do an overview of this, because that talks a little bit about the differences between those offerings in this series. I think it's called the Great Statesman series, I believe. But this game here is you're playing one of the three powers of Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. To face Germany and Japan. And so there's a political side to it, which is this conference table where you're going to be picking out your advisors. Each faction has a deck of these cards that have unique advisors that have a numerical value. It has what they do as far as the play is concerned. There's not a lot of history on the card, but these are representative people in history, and what role they kind of play is, the role they played or their value is kind of reflected by what their attribute is or what their value is on the card. And so you're going to be playing these advisors on this track to deal with conference issues. And there's all kinds of different conference issues that once they're decided here, get translated over to this board. This is basically the theater board. So you have the European theater and you have the Pacific theater, and it's kind of like a states of siege track, right? Where the Allies are all converging on a center, and once they get to the center of either Germany or Japan, then they have finished that aspect of the war. They've conquered them. But there's things that happen along the way. There's certain victory points they can get for reaching certain spaces. There's also some events that might occur. There's also this other controlling nations. This is the military track, but there's also kind of a political track of sorts that you're dealing with for these minor countries out there. And that's true for the European theater as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this board, but it all emanates from the conference. Whatever you do on the conference will affect this board, and then there's some play that you do on this board with your military support, and you're rolling against attacks and the like. There's also the development of the A-bomb, and there's a whole separate track for that. Part of that comes from this conference, but it gets represented over here, and that has some effects over the gameplay. And you're keeping track of victory points and the like up here on this record track up at the top. They're called political military table is how you do most of your effects on this board. As far as components are concerned, there's some counters, not a lot of counters. I mean, for a GMT game, there's not a lot of counters, but you have these wooden bits. You have these, there's Roosevelt, so he'll be on this track, and then You've got some counters. You've got a special die because it's a 6-sided dice, but it's in the color of the faction because it's going to be doing its own rules. You have these little tiddlywinks in there. Those kind of are part of the pole mill table, and they kind of go on these minor countries to show influence, and then you put these cylinders to show, control, or something to that effect. And so, the components are fine. It's interesting that all three of these games use wood. All three of these games use cards. All three of these games have mounted boards. A lot of similarities there as far as production goes. So let's get back and start getting out the keys, because for Kilroy's key 3, you have to dole out some keys. So in these 3 games right here, as far as production value is concerned, the P of production, this is kind of tough. As I said, all 3 have a lot of similarities to each other. Although I think I'm going to give a little bit of a nod or a tip of the scale to Churchill for production. Give 2 keys, so they get 3 keys. Votes for Women gets 2 keys, and Corrupt Bargain gets 1 key. It's a big key, but it gets 1 key. Really close between these 3. I think Churchill gets a little bit of a nod because of some of the extra components in the counters and some of the player aids that help clarify some stuff in the game. Women's Votes, I think, beats out Corrupt Bargain just by a little bit, just because, again, it has some special dice and has just a little bit more production value in the game. Next, we turn to Operation, and what Operation is really kind of dealing with, it's really dealing with the gameplay. It's dealing with the rules of the game and how, ease of play, clarity of play, does if it's trying to simulate something to the rules, makes sense in how it is simulating it. And in this regard, it's kind of interesting. Churchill is a little bit more involved of a game. There's a lot more going on. I think the rules are clear, but takes a little bit more chewing into. Likewise, Corrupt Bargain, although not that complicated of a game, took a little bit of understanding as well. I mean, the rule books here are relatively similar. Actually, Votes for Women is less, but the Corrupt Bargain took a little bit more of trying to understand exactly what they were doing. And I play a lot of political games and own a lot of purely political or election type games, which Corrupt Bargain fits more into that category. So with respect to keys for Operation, I'm going to go with 3 keys for Votes for Women. I'm going to go with 2 keys for Churchill and 1 key for Corrupt Bargain. Not that this is unintelligible and it's tough to get to. It's really not that hard to get into. It's just that I just felt like for Operation and what it was trying to do, this had a bigger lift, and I thought they did a better job of meeting that lift than what Corrupt Bargain was doing. Now we get to value, and value can mean a lot of different things. It could mean how well does it simulate, like if it's a war game, how well does it simulate the battle or the war or the conflict? If in a historical game, how well does it simulate the election? Corrupt Bargain, it doesn't make any bones about it. It's not really meant to be a simulation. It's meant to be a game. So it's not really trying to show you a historical effect of the 1824 election. It's more gameplay. Votes for Women, on the other hand, is not a pure simulation because there's a lot of card play involved, but it's really more trying to show you the history of it. You're going to learn who some of the leaders are, some of the different events that took place, some of the the challenges that these people face in trying to get the passage of the 19th Amendment. So there is a little bit more simulation value, I think, in Votes for Women than maybe in Corrupt Bargain. In Churchill, I mean, is not World War II. It's an abstraction of World War II. But the way that the conference works out, the political nature of the conference, and the gameplay and the card play that you play there, and how that translates over to the actual operation or the military display, is really it's kind of a genius stroke. It's a very interesting game and interaction in that regard. So when it comes down to replayability, I like Corrupt Bargain. I think game-wise, it's a straight-up game, political game, but the 1824 theme is there, but it's not as strong. It's not as strong as the simulation. So I'm going to put a 1 key there for that. And as far as gameplay, you know, there's solid gameplay there. There's a solid game there, but you know, so is Votes for Women in that regard. So I mean, there's not, it doesn't distinguish itself enough for me to, you know, pick that over Votes for Women in that regard. So now we're down to, you know, what's the most value between Votes for Women and for Churchill. And in this regard, I'm probably going to go with Churchill just because there's so much more going on here. So that means that there's more to explore. Every game is going to be a little bit different. The way the conferences play out each turn are going to be drastically different, and that's going to change this board and how this board plays out each turn. So in that regard, I'm going to give it the 2, and close behind is Votes for Women. The Votes for Women, again, plays out differently as well. There's a certain amount of chaos in that deck and how you use it and what comes out when. But in that regard, you don't have as much decision space as you do in Churchill. So I'm going to always lean for value purposes to the game that gives me a little bit more decision space. It gives me a little bit more choices, and what I decide to do and how I decide to do it and when I decide to do it, having a greater impact on the gameplay is something that I find more value in than being kind of a slave to the gameplay, you know, of the cards or the dice rolls. Not that there's a lot of luck in these, but there is some, and there's some luck in Churchill. You still got to do some rolls in here, but the way that the political element of this and the decisions you make, how it interplays with the military, I think just adds more value in that regard. So at the end of the day, let's count up the keys. We've got 1, 2, and 3 keys for Corrupt Bargain. Again, that doesn't mean it's a bad game. It made my top 3 of political games for New2Me 2022. So still a good game there. Votes for Women is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Really strong showing. And then Churchill is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the close one, but my top of Kilroy's key 3 for political games, New2Me for 2022. Is that enough qualifiers for you? Is Churchill, Mark Herman's Churchill. Now, I just got this, and I just got a few plays in. It was enough for me to feel comfortable to bring it into the mix. Maybe more plays might change this a little bit. Maybe more plays of this. I've actually played Churchill more than I played any one of these other 2. So that's a little bit of built-in bias to this as well. But you know, that's what happens when you're trying to, you know, sort out the games you've played and what you think about them. Love to know your point of view and what you think about these games, what you think about, is there any other political games that are new to you in 2022 or should have been new to me in 2022 and I just didn't get to or just don't know. So let me know what you think about the political games that are on your table, on your shelf, that and what you think about them. Anyway, that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for stopping by. Always, always, always appreciate that. Appreciate you for doing that. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Give me your point of view. I can handle it. Anyway, take care and have a good one. Thanks for watching.